Vanessa moved out when Emily was 12. She said they had grown apart, but really, Vanessa had outgrown what Nicholas offered. She wanted sleek city nights and people who wore Rolexes, not someone who fixed his own car in the driveway and called it a win. The divorce was bitter, not because they fought loudly, but because they fought with silence. With cold stares and drawn-out signatures. With strategy. Vanessa's attorney was ruthless. Nicholas wasn't surprised, he was the one who helped her prep for the bar exam, after all. At the time, he didn't have the stomach to battle her over every asset. All he wanted was to stay close to Emily, to give her consistency. He thought, naively, that being civil would preserve peace. So when Vanessa requested control of Emily's trust fund, something his father had left for her years ago, he signed it over, believing she'd act in their daughter's best interest. He didn't think she'd weaponize it. He didn't think she'd hand it to someone else's son. Nicholas blinked and looked over at Emily again. She was older now than he remembered. Not in age, he saw her nearly every day, but in demeanor. Sharper. More composed. "You knew she'd do it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Emily shrugged, eyes still on the horizon. "I didn't think she'd wait this long." Nicholas let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "I never should have signed over control," he said, shaking his head. "I thought she'd. I don't know. At least wait until you were in college." "She doesn't think I'm worth the money," Emily said flatly. "She never has." The words hit him like a slap. He wanted to argue. To say Vanessa loved her in her own way. But he'd stopped lying to himself years ago. Vanessa didn't understand Emily. And what people don't understand, they dismiss. From the time Emily was little, she'd been different. While other kids played with dolls or joined gymnastics, Emily tinkered with old laptops Nicholas pulled from the e-waste bin at work. By the time she was 12, she taught herself Python. At 14, she built a basic algorithm that could predict high school sports betting odds for fun. Nicholas never understood half of what she did. But he understood this, it mattered to her. And that was enough. He supported her the only way he knew how, quietly. He picked up second shifts to buy her faster processors. Took her to weekend STEM camps. Let her stay up late because debugging code was apparently a reasonable excuse to miss bedtime. He didn't know how to mentor a genius. But he knew how to be present. And he knew how to listen. Nicholas finally started the engine, the soft rumble filling the silence. As they pulled out of the parking garage, he glanced over again. "What did you mean when you said you fixed it?" Emily smiled, faint and knowing. "I'll show you when we get home." He nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel hopeful or terrified. Whatever she meant, he had a feeling it was going to change everything. As they drove through the heart of downtown Austin, Nicholas couldn't stop thinking about the life Vanessa had built since the divorce. It was all surface-level sparkle, a world made for appearances, curated for Instagram, and lived through glass towers and dinner galas. It hadn't always been this way. Vanessa used to find joy in simpler things. Their first apartment didn't even have central air, and she'd once proudly told friends she didn't need fancy crap to feel happy. But somewhere along the way, maybe after law school, maybe after that first big corporate client, something in her flipped. And Daniel Brooks? He was the perfect match for who Vanessa became. Daniel was a high-ranking partner at one of Austin's most prestigious corporate law firms. Suave, hyper-confident, and never seen without a Rolex or a press quote, he was the type of man who ordered for you at restaurants and called it chivalry. Vanessa called him a real man. Nicholas just called him predictable. Their condo, perched on the 34th floor, looked more like a magazine spread than a home. Everything was sleek and cold, brushed metal, black granite, floor-to-ceiling windows with city views. No clutter, no warmth, no trace of a child ever living there. Which made sense, considering Emily never stayed the night. But Zach? Zach had a room, a car, a credit card, and a golden parachute. Zach Brooks, Daniel's only son, was everything Vanessa thought success should look like: tall, clean-cut, private school educated, law school bound. He wore expensive clothes with zero personality and dropped terms like legacy admissions and networking opportunities like they were achievements. And he had no issue taking what wasn't his. Nicholas had seen it firsthand, the smirks, the subtle jabs at Emily's interests. The way Zach would act confused whenever Emily spoke about machine learning or trading algorithms, then lean over to Vanessa and whisper something like she talks like she's in a video game. Vanessa never corrected him. She laughed. She always laughed when someone made Emily small. Because deep down, Vanessa hated what she couldn't control or understand. Emily's independence, her talent, her refusal to need validation, it grated on her. Vanessa needed to be the center of every room, the source of all power. If she couldn't shape you, she'd replace you. And that's exactly what she did. To Vanessa, transferring the trust to Zach wasn't a betrayal. It was a business decision. She didn't see a daughter, she saw an underperforming asset. Nicholas clenched the wheel a little tighter as the truck turned toward their side of the city. Smaller houses. Fewer lights. Less noise. But more honesty. Emily leaned back in the passenger seat, unreadable. Quiet. Vanessa might have built a kingdom of glass, but the storm was coming. And this time, it wasn't Nicholas bringing it. It was the daughter Vanessa had thrown away. Nicholas didn't have to ask how Emily had known. She wasn't the kind of kid who needed to be told twice to see a pattern. She'd been watching her mother closely for years, quietly noting the shift in tone, the backhanded compliments, the way Vanessa slowly started treating her more like an inconvenience than a daughter. Emily wasn't loud. She wasn't the kind to throw tantrums or argue over dinner. But that didn't mean she didn't see everything. She just filed it away, quietly, methodically, the way she did everything. From the time she was small, Emily had learned that silence was her most powerful tool. Vanessa thrived on control, on emotional reactions she could redirect or shame into submission. But Emily never gave her that satisfaction. When Vanessa mocked her for skipping prom to finish a coding boot camp, Emily said nothing. When she called her obsessed for turning down a summer internship to finish building her prototype, Emily just nodded and went back to her screen. She never defended herself, not because she was weak, but because she didn't see the point in arguing with someone who had already decided not to understand her. Over the years, the tension between mother and daughter became less of a battle and more of a cold war. No screaming matches, no slamming doors, just a growing void filled with disappointed sighs and withering looks. Vanessa tried, in her own twisted way, to steer Emily towards something more digestible. She'd send her job postings for office assistant roles, forward articles about women in law, mention how Zach was helping prep Daniel's client pitch decks. Emily always responded with a simple thanks, knowing full well Vanessa wasn't helping. She was trying to reshape her into someone more socially acceptable. Someone less threatening. But Emily had made a decision a long time ago. She wasn't going to live in a world where her worth was measured by how much it resembled Vanessa's. She wasn't going to fight for space in a house that only wanted a mirror. She would build her own space. Quietly. Precisely. And when the time came, she would make sure no one could take it from her. So when Vanessa signed over the trust, Emily didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't even blink. She had already seen it coming. And she had already moved on. The rebellion wasn't in her words. It was in the code she wrote, the network she built, the vision she shaped line by line, trade by trade. Her mother thought silence meant surrender. But Emily's silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. And she was just getting started. They didn't speak much for the rest of the drive. Emily stayed tucked into her seat, one leg curled under the other, eyes scanning the notifications on her phone. Nicholas kept glancing sideways, still trying to make sense of what she'd said in Vanessa's office. "I fixed everything." It kept echoing in his head, but he didn't press her. He knew better than to pull too hard on Emily's threads. She always unraveled them on her own terms. When they got back to their apartment, she kicked off her shoes, walked straight to her room, and left the door cracked open behind her. Nicholas stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure if he was being invited in or ignored. Then she called out without turning around. "You coming, or what?" He stepped inside and was hit by the soft hum of machines. Her room was a controlled chaos of cables, glowing monitors, and open notebooks full of formulas and diagrams he couldn't begin to understand. 3 large screens bathed the walls in shifting shades of blue and green, stock tickers, predictive graphs, algorithm heat maps. Her desk was cluttered but intentional, a battlefield of soda cans, snack wrappers, and an army of USB drives. It didn't look like a teenager's bedroom. It looked like a startup. Emily was already typing, her fingers moving so fast across the keyboard they sounded like rain hitting a metal roof. She spoke without looking up. "I know you're wondering what I meant earlier." Nicholas stayed quiet, leaning against the doorframe. She tapped a few keys, and one of the screens shifted, pulling up a sleek black interface labeled Orion in white letters. "This," she said, finally turning to face him, "is what I've been building for the last 2 years." Nicholas blinked. "You built this?" Emily nodded. "It's a proprietary AI system. Orion stands for Optimized Real-Time Intelligence for Opportunities and Navigation. It's a trading engine, but it's not just a bot. It's predictive. It absorbs live market data, news trends, sentiment analysis, historical movement, and it calculates probable price shifts before they happen." He stared at the screen, at the swarm of numbers, the graphs bending upward like climbing ivy. "So it's like a stock forecaster?" Emily smiled. "That's what most people think. But no, it doesn't guess. It learns. I've fed it 6 years' worth of data and trained it to think in patterns, not prices. Orion doesn't play the market. It outpaces it." Nicholas took a slow step forward, suddenly aware of just how out of his depth he was. "And this works?" Emily clicked another screen. A new graph appeared, real trades, time-stamped, with profits logged down to the second. "I beta tested it with a paper account. Then opened a shadow fund. It's beaten the S&P 500 by 28% in the last 6 months." Nicholas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Jesus, Em. I didn't tell you because I wasn't ready. I needed to make sure it worked first. I needed to build it right, from the ground up. No help. No shortcuts." Nicholas walked over slowly, eyes still fixed on the screen. "And the trust fund?" She leaned back in her chair, arms folded over her chest. "I stopped counting on that a long time ago. I knew she'd give it to Zach eventually. This was my backup plan." "No," Nicholas said, his voice quieter now. "This wasn't your backup. This is your real plan. Everything else was just noise." Emily looked up at him, and for the first time all night, he saw something flicker beneath the calm, relief, maybe. Or pride. "She doesn't think I'm serious," she said. "She thinks I'm some weird little coder who'll grow out of it." Nicholas sat down on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed. "Emily, this is bigger than serious. This is," he shook his head. "I don't even know what this is. But I do know it's not something anyone can take from you." A pause stretched between them, long and full. He looked around the room again, the heart of her creation, the battlefield where she'd chosen to fight quietly rather than beg for space. And that's when it hit him. She never needed the trust. Never needed her mother's validation. Never even needed his protection, not in the way he thought. She'd already protected herself. She'd built a future no one else could give her. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. Emily smiled without looking away from the screen. "Good. Because this is just the beginning." Nicholas was still reeling from the revelation, but Emily wasn't finished. She tapped another key and the middle monitor shifted again, this time displaying a dashboard that looked more like something from a Silicon Valley boardroom than a teenager's bedroom. Live market feeds pulsed across the screen, trades blinking in green and red. A column on the right showed something Nicholas could understand: account balances. And they weren't small. "This," Emily said, pointing to a graph climbing steadily up and to the right, "is my private test fund. I launched it 6 months ago using a dummy LLC. Just me and Logan." Nicholas squinted at the screen. "Is that 9 million? 10.3, she corrected. "That's just market growth. No external funding yet." He rubbed his face, trying to process it. "Wait, so you're telling me your software has made over $10 million? Already?" She nodded like it was no big deal. "Technically it hasn't realized all of that yet. But it's tracking for 12 by next quarter. And that's before we take on outside capital." Nicholas gave a low whistle, the kind people make when they're not sure if they're impressed or just overwhelmed. "That's more than the trust. 5 times more." Emily leaned back in her chair and laced her fingers behind her head. "Exactly why I didn't bother fighting her for it." She clicked open an email thread next, one that was filled with names even Nicholas recognized. Big names. Investment firms, hedge fund executives, a few venture capital contacts with blue checkmarks beside their profiles. "They've all reached out in the last 2 months," she said, scrolling through casually. "Most of them found Orion through a finance forum I posted a teaser demo on. I didn't expect it to blow up. But then one VC picked it up and shared it on Twitter. Things kind of exploded." Nicholas shook his head slowly. "You built this in your room? By yourself?" "Well," she said, "Logan helped with the back-end infrastructure. And I have one mentor who gives me legal advice under the radar. But yes. The code is mine. The design. The structure. All of it." He stood, walking toward the screen like getting closer would somehow help him understand it better. "They think you're older, don't they? These investors." "Some of them think I'm a team of people," she replied with a smirk. "Which works for now." Nicholas turned back toward her, his voice softer. "What happens next?" Emily's smirk faded into something quieter, measured, deliberate. "I form a parent company," she said. "Go into stealth mode for a few more months. Lock down legal. Build up the infrastructure. And then I launch." He nodded slowly. "And the valuation?" She clicked into a spreadsheet and turned the screen toward him. "Conservatively? I'm worth about 15 million already. But if the market stays stable and my projections hold, we'll be north of 50 by the end of next year." Nicholas exhaled. His daughter wasn't just playing with computers. She was building an empire. Nicholas stood there longer than he probably should have, just taking it all in, the machines, the data, the quiet confidence on his daughter's face. For years, he'd thought of himself as her shield, the buffer between her and a world that didn't understand her. The one who made sure she was fed, safe, believed in. And he had done that, to the best of his ability. But now, looking at her across the soft glow of her monitors, he realized something that hit him harder than he expected. She didn't need him to protect her anymore. She'd already outgrown that version of their relationship. While he was worrying about tuition, she was outpacing Wall Street. While Vanessa was scoffing at her computer hobby, Emily had quietly built something smarter, faster, and more scalable than most seasoned traders ever dreamed of. And the strangest part? Nicholas didn't feel obsolete. He felt proud. Bone deep, almost aching pride that sat heavy in his chest, like something sacred. But tangled inside that pride was a thread of grief for the years they lost to silence, to Vanessa's belittling remarks, to his own quiet struggle just to stay afloat. He wished he could have done more. Given more. Seen it sooner. "I missed it," he said suddenly, his voice quieter than he intended. Emily looked up, confused. "Missed what?" "All of it," he said, motioning to the screens, the systems, her world. "You were building this right under my nose. And I was worried about your college fund." She tilted her head, expression softening. "You gave me more than money, Dad. You gave me space. Nicholas swallowed hard. I didn't realize you were this far ahead. Emily smiled gently. That's okay. I needed to be. I knew I wouldn't have time to explain. He looked at her then, really looked, not as the child he once tucked into bed, but as the woman she'd quietly become. And in that moment, he understood his role had changed. He wasn't her protector anymore. He was her witness. Later that night, long after Emily had retreated back into her code and Nicholas had gone through the motions of making dinner, he sat alone on the worn couch with the TV flickering in the background. His eyes weren't on the screen. They were turned inward, tracing the past like old footsteps in the dust. He remembered coming home late from work to find her asleep at the kitchen table, slumped over a notebook filled with messy logic statements and scribbled pseudocode. She must have been 13 then, still using his old Toshiba laptop with the busted trackpad and the letter A missing from the keyboard. He remembered the summer nights when she'd stay up past midnight, lights off, monitor glow illuminating her determined face as she taught herself JavaScript from free online courses. He never scolded her for staying up too late, he'd just make her toast and sit quietly at the edge of the room, sipping coffee while she worked, pretending not to watch. He remembered weekends when she'd drag him to thrift stores, not for clothes, but to find discarded monitors and circuit boards she could salvage for parts. The cashier always gave them odd looks, but Emily just smiled, satisfied with her strange little treasure pile. And through it all, she never once asked for permission to dream. She just built. Nicholas let out a soft breath, resting his head against the back of the couch. In all those years, he thought he was giving her the basics, a roof, a meal, someone to listen. But maybe that was all she ever needed. Not applause. Not direction. Just space. And a dad who stayed. The next morning, Nicholas was still replaying everything in his head when Emily emerged from her room, hair messy, hoodie zipped halfway up, a coffee mug in one hand and her laptop in the other. She dropped into the chair across from him at the kitchen table like it was just another normal Saturday, no billion-dollar algorithms, no family betrayal, no looming storms. But Nicholas had learned something over the years. When Emily looked the most casual, she was usually about to drop something serious. She took a sip from her mug and opened her laptop with one hand. I need to show you something, she said, eyes on the screen. Nicholas leaned forward. What is it? She turned the screen toward him, revealing a folder titled Trust Override, Final Version. Inside were PDFs, scanned documents, notarized affidavits, emails between attorneys. Nicholas's brows drew together. What is this? Emily tapped one of the files and opened a document with a signature block at the bottom, Vanessa's name scrawled neatly across the line. That's the paper she signed yesterday, Emily said. The one giving Zach control of the trust. Nicholas narrowed his eyes. Yeah. The one that gutted me. Emily nodded. Except, it means nothing. He blinked. Come again? Emily closed the document and opened another. About 9 months ago, I quietly petitioned the original trust attorney for a structure review. Turns out, when Grandpa left me that money, the trust had a conditional clause: if the legal guardian proved incapable or acted against the beneficiary's interest, oversight could revert. Nicholas sat back, trying to absorb that. So what did you do? I collected evidence. Statements. Pattern behavior. I logged every time she dismissed me publicly. Every text, every email where she insulted my work or referred to me as directionless. Logan helped me organize it. Then I presented it to the original firm that handled the trust setup. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to give you false hope. Nicholas stared at her like she'd just spoken another language. You're telling me Vanessa doesn't have control of the trust anymore? No, Emily said calmly. She hasn't for months. He blinked. But she signed. A decoy, Emily interrupted. A procedural draft with no legal teeth. I sent it to her through a dummy email account she thought was her lawyer's assistant. She didn't check. She never checks. Nicholas was speechless. He leaned back slowly, letting it sink in. You tricked her. I protected myself, she corrected. I knew she'd pull something like this. So I set the trap and let her walk right into it. He let out a low, disbelieving laugh, running a hand down his face. Jesus, that's cold. She shrugged. No colder than stealing your daughter's future and handing it to a boy who's never worked a day in his life. Nicholas shook his head, torn between pride and disbelief. And she has no idea? None, Emily said, closing the folder. As far as she's concerned, Zach's $2 million richer. Let her plan the shopping trip. It'll be fun watching them figure it out later. Nicholas looked at his daughter, trying to reconcile the quiet kid who used to build websites in her bedroom with the tactical genius now sitting across from him. This wasn't just coding anymore. This was war. And Emily had already won the first battle before anyone knew a war had even started. Nicholas couldn't stop shaking his head, still stunned by what he'd just learned. I don't even know what to say, he muttered, leaning forward on the table. You rewrote your entire financial future behind her back and made her sign her own trap. Emily looked almost amused. It wasn't that complicated, she said, though her eyes glinted with something far more calculated than modesty. Once I got access to the original trust paperwork, I started digging. Most people assume those things are locked down. But trusts are like code, if you understand the logic, you can trace the vulnerabilities. Nicholas blinked. You're saying you hacked it? I'm saying I optimized it, she replied smoothly. I didn't touch the money. I didn't need to. I just rewrote the oversight structure and filed a revision with the original managing firm. They agreed I had enough evidence to be taken seriously. From that point on, I had more legal say over that account than she did. She just didn't know it. Nicholas let out a soft whistle. You've been tracking her for months? She nodded. Her and Zach. Email logins. Calendar events. Even IP addresses from her office and Daniel's firm. She's predictable, Dad. Sloppy. She reused passwords and forwarded confidential documents to her personal Gmail. I mirrored her inbox the whole time. He stared at her. You spied on your mother. I audited a hostile stakeholder, Emily said dryly. Same principle. I didn't want revenge, I wanted leverage. And control. Nicholas didn't know whether to be alarmed or impressed. Maybe both. So when she printed that document, she thought it was the real one? Emily nodded. She thought she was outmaneuvering me. But what she really did was lock herself out permanently. Her signature on that version proves she made the decision without consulting legal counsel. It invalidates any future claim she tries to make about acting in my best interest. Nicholas ran a hand through his hair. And when does she find out? Emily's smirk returned, subtle but sharp. When she tries to access the trust account and sees her credentials are revoked. He exhaled, shaking his head slowly. You really don't leave anything to chance. I can't afford to, she said simply. Not with people like her. And in that moment, Nicholas finally understood something deeper, not just the brilliance of his daughter's mind, but the sheer determination she carried. She hadn't built Orion just to change the financial world. She'd built it because she'd been at war for years. And now, she wasn't just surviving. She was winning. The weight of everything Emily had just revealed settled over Nicholas like a thick fog. He sat in stunned silence, elbows on the kitchen table, head bowed, trying to process the idea that his daughter had outplayed not just the system, but her own mother. The trust. The signatures. The surveillance. It was all so surgical, so deliberate. But the more he thought about it, the more one question began to bubble to the surface. It had been whispering in the background of his thoughts for weeks, maybe months. Something about Vanessa's timing. About how calculated everything had seemed. And now, looking at Emily, it clawed its way out of him. Why now? He asked softly, not even raising his head. Why did she finally pull the trigger? After all these years, why now? There was a pause. The kind that only comes when someone's deciding whether to tell you the truth or protect you from it. Emily closed her laptop slowly. I think you already know, she said. Nicholas looked up, confusion rippling across his face. Know what? Emily hesitated, then pushed a piece of paper across the table. A printout, an old email thread. Vanessa's name at the top. The subject line read, Confidential, Property Transfer Timeline. The other name on the thread made Nicholas's stomach twist. Daniel Brooks. He stared at it for a long time before he spoke again. How long? Emily's voice was low. Controlled. They've been involved since before the divorce. Nicholas felt the air drain from his lungs. Jesus Christ. They started meeting privately while she was still living with us, Emily said. Late-night emails. Trips she said were client dinners. I didn't want to believe it either. I found the first messages 2 years ago. I've been collecting more ever since. He leaned back in his chair like he'd been punched. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was hollow. She lied to me. 4 years. Emily's eyes softened, but she didn't reach for him. She knew better. She didn't just lie, she said quietly. She planned it. Everything. The divorce, the custody agreement, even the trust shift. Daniel advised her on how to structure it all. They wanted to secure the money for Zach, position him as the legacy kid from the perfect power couple. You and I were expendable. Nicholas let out a bitter, hollow laugh. Of course we were. For a moment, he looked like he might explode. But the anger didn't come out loud. It came out quiet, through his hands, balled into fists. Through his jaw, clenched so tight his neck trembled. Through the shaking breath he finally let go. All that time, he said. I kept thinking maybe it was me. That I wasn't enough. That I didn't work hard enough. Didn't love her right. Emily didn't interrupt. She just let the truth settle in the room like dust. Nicholas's voice cracked when he finally spoke again. She made me feel like a failure, Em. And the whole time, she was already gone. I know, she said gently. I know, Dad. He stood slowly, pacing to the sink. His back was to her now, but she could see his shoulders rise and fall in uneven breaths. His hands gripped the counter like he was trying to hold the whole kitchen together. I gave her everything, he said. My trust. My loyalty. My goddamn heart. And she traded it in like a used car. She doesn't deserve your grief, Emily said from behind him. He nodded, but his eyes were wet. I know. But it still hurts. Silence fell again. A deeper one this time. When he finally turned back around, his face was raw, aged by truth. But something else was there too. Something Emily hadn't seen in years. Resolve. He walked back to the table and sat across from her again. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Emily's answer was immediate. Because I needed to prove it. If I told you too early, you would have tried to fix it. But this wasn't yours to fix. It was mine. He nodded slowly. You're right. I would have tried. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. I didn't need you to save me, Dad. I just needed you to believe in me. Nicholas let out a breath that trembled at the edges. And I do. More than anything. They sat there for a while, not saying much. Just two survivors in the quiet aftermath of betrayal, finally on the same side of the truth. Nicholas had always believed his role was to shield Emily from pain. But now he saw it clearly, she hadn't needed a shield. She needed a witness. And he was ready to stand beside her for whatever came next. They stayed at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold and the last words of anger had burned themselves out. Outside, the sun had begun its quiet descent, washing the apartment in a warm amber glow that softened the lines in Nicholas's face and gave Emily's room across the hall a golden outline, like a sanctuary lit from within. Nicholas finally broke the silence, his voice rough from everything it had carried. "I'm sorry," he said. "For not seeing it. For letting her do that to you, for letting her do it to me." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't rush to comfort him either. She just looked at him with calm, steady eyes, the same eyes that used to peek around corners at him when she was little, watching him fix the radiator or slice vegetables with careful focus. Back then, she had studied him like he was some kind of blueprint. "I didn't need you to stop her," she said quietly. "I just needed to know I wasn't crazy for seeing what I saw." Nicholas looked down, ashamed. "I thought staying civil, staying quiet, would give you a better life. I didn't realize silence could do just as much damage." Emily's voice softened. "You did what you had to do to get through it. You kept food in the fridge. You kept the lights on. You let me stay up coding all night without complaining about the electric bill." She smiled faintly. "That wasn't nothing." He tried to smile, but it didn't quite land. "I should have done more." Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was warm, still small in his callous grip, but firm. "You showed me how to fight by surviving," she said. He looked up, blinking fast. The way she said it wasn't dramatic. It was fact. A quiet truth between two people who had both been bent by the same storm and come out shaped by it, not shattered. "You're not just my dad," Emily added. "You were my first example of what it means to keep going when the people closest to you fail you. That's what got me through." Nicholas swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think you noticed." "I noticed everything." They sat there, not as father and child anymore, but as equals. As people who had each carried more than they should have, and somehow come through it not broken, but forged. Whatever war lay ahead, they wouldn't be fighting it alone. By the time evening settled into night, Nicholas had started to understand something else about his daughter, something far colder than he'd ever imagined, but undeniably brilliant. Emily wasn't seeking revenge. She was engineering silence. Not the kind that came from submission or fear, but the kind that followed after someone had already won and no longer needed to explain themselves. She didn't want to call Vanessa and scream. She didn't want a confrontation in court. She didn't even want an apology. She wanted absence. She wanted irrelevance. "They're going to find out," Nicholas said as he sat back down on the couch, watching her plug in another set of drives. "But you're not going to tell them, are you?" Emily didn't even glance at him. She was focused, dragging code across her screen, executing a test batch of Orion's next trade cycle. "No," she said flatly. "They'll find out through headlines." Nicholas paused. "What kind of headlines?" She clicked once, then turned her screen slightly toward him. A mock-up article filled the page: Forbes, Bloomberg, TechCrunch. It didn't matter which. The headline was clean and brutal. Teen founder's AI trading system surpasses $50 million valuation, Sage Technologies set to disrupt global markets. His eyes widened. "Sage? I'm rebranding Orion under a parent company. Strategic Algorithmic Global Engine. It's cleaner, bolder. And I already bought the domain." Nicholas let out a low whistle. "And you're planning to go public with this?" Emily leaned back in her chair. "I've already taken 3 meetings. The investors think I'm older. They think I have a team of engineers behind me. When they find out I'm a 19-year-old girl who built this in a 2-bedroom apartment on a recycled MacBook, it's going to explode." He stared at her. "You're not doing this to prove anything to them, are you?" "No," she said, almost too calmly. "I'm doing it because I want the silence to haunt them more than my voice ever could." She turned back to the screen and typed a few quick lines before adding, "They don't get to claim me when I succeed. There's no seat for them at the table." Nicholas leaned back, a strange mix of awe and concern pressing against his ribs. There was no doubt Emily had grown into something formidable. Not just smart. Not just successful. But precise. Hardened. "Does it ever get lonely?" he asked after a while. She stopped typing for the first time and looked at him, a quiet pause in her eyes. Sometimes, she admitted. But not when I remember who they are. What they chose. What they threw away. Nicholas nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about removing their power to ever hurt her again. And that kind of silence? That was louder than any scream. 2 nights later, Nicholas was finishing up the dishes when he heard a sound he hadn't heard in years, not from Emily, anyway. Panic. It wasn't loud. Not screaming. Not chaos. Just a single sharp intake of breath. A pause. A frozen second in time. He turned toward her room instantly. Emily? No answer. He walked down the hallway, heart thudding harder with every step. The door was open, but what he saw stopped him cold. Emily sat at her desk, eyes locked on the center monitor, where red error messages were stacking faster than she could click. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen. Her face had gone pale. Nicholas had never seen her like that. Emily, he said again, gently now, stepping into the room. What is it? She snapped out of her daze and immediately sprang into motion, typing furiously, windows opening and closing in rapid succession across her screens. I'm being breached, she said, voice clipped. Server side. Something just tried to inject malware into Orion's backend. Nicholas didn't fully understand what that meant, but he could see it in her eyes. This wasn't some glitch. This was an attack. Are they in? He asked. Emily didn't look away from her screen. No. Not yet. But they were close, too close. They mapped the code structure, which means they had access for at least a few hours. Nicholas stood behind her, helpless. Can you stop it? She didn't answer. She was already moving, pulling up logs, encrypting protocols, locking down IP permissions. Her hands were steady now, mechanical almost, but Nicholas could see it, the way her jaw clenched, the way her breathing shortened. For the first time since all this began, Emily wasn't untouchable. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Then, finally, she leaned back. Cut them out, she said. Blocked every port they used. Scrambled the proxies. Nicholas let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. You're good? Emily gave a short nod, but her face was still tight. Mostly. They didn't steal data. They were looking for vulnerabilities. Nicholas squinted at the screen. Can you tell who it was? She was already ahead of him, pulling up a traceback utility she'd written herself. The lines of code whirled by, each one narrowing the search, filtering clues from digital breadcrumbs. Then she stopped. A single IP address blinked on the screen. Austin, Texas. Same service provider. Nicholas stepped forward, his stomach dropping. Is that? Emily clicked again, zooming in on the internal metadata. The last login name, the device type. Zach Brooks _13. For a full beat, Emily just stared at the screen. Then she exhaled, low and cold. He tried to steal Orion. Nicholas felt a bolt of fury rise up inside him. That little. Emily held up a hand, her voice flat now. Let him try. He walked into something I built to track everything. He thought he was clever. He left fingerprints all over my server. Nicholas clenched his fists. What are you going to do? Emily didn't answer right away. She just leaned in toward the screen and said, almost to herself. I'm going to show him what it feels like to play games with someone who doesn't lose. Nicholas was still pacing the living room when Emily emerged from her room, calm now, too calm. The flicker of panic from earlier had vanished, replaced with something harder. Colder. He turned toward her. What are we going to do about Zach? She didn't even blink. We're not going to do anything, she said. I already did. Nicholas narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Emily walked over to the kitchen table and opened her laptop again, this time pulling up a mirrored version of the interface Zach had accessed during the attempted breach. "That wasn't Orion he touched," she said. "It was a decoy I set up 2 months ago. A shadow version of the algorithm, bugged, unstable, incomplete. I've been using it as bait." Nicholas stepped closer. "You're telling me you knew he might try something?" "I knew someone would," she replied. "I didn't expect it to be Zach this soon, but I'm not surprised. He's always been entitled. Thought he could outsmart anyone just because he wore a suit and got decent grades." She clicked into a folder titled Surveillance Capture and played a screen recording. It showed Zach's login attempt, his attempt to decrypt the code, and the exact moment he tried to reroute Orion's logic paths, triggering embedded tracking software Emily had hidden in the decoy system. "I flagged every action he took," she said. "Every keystroke was logged and timestamped. Then I cross-referenced it with legal boundaries on corporate intrusion and intellectual property fraud." Nicholas stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "So he committed a felony." "2, actually," Emily said, eyes gleaming. "Unlawful access of protected systems, and attempted misappropriation of proprietary trade secrets." "And now?" Nicholas asked. She closed the laptop with a click that echoed through the room. "Now," she said, "I have him. Legally." There was no rage in her voice. Just precision. And for the first time since this war began, Nicholas realized something deeper. Emily didn't just want to win. She wanted to leave no room for anyone to ever come for her again. Less than 6 weeks after the breach, Emily stood beneath the towering lights of a private media hall in downtown Austin, her face framed by a halo of cameras and flashing strobes. The space buzzed with that peculiar kind of electricity, half corporate hunger, half disbelief. Journalists whispered at the edges of the room, investors leaned forward in their chairs, and a massive digital screen behind her displayed one number in bold, white font. $1.1 billion. Nicholas stood near the back, just outside the main spotlight, watching his daughter with a pride so sharp it felt like it might split him in half. She wore a crisp black blazer, her hair tied back in a simple bun. No diamonds. No forced smile. Just presence. He could hear murmurs around him. "She's 19? This can't be real." Sage's valuation doubled in 3 months. She turned down Sequoia Capital for a private route. But none of it touched her. She stepped to the mic like she belonged there. "Good afternoon," Emily said, her voice clear and steady. 3 years ago, I started building a predictive trading engine in a 2-bedroom apartment with a salvaged laptop and free cloud credits. Today, I'm proud to announce that Sage Technologies has officially filed for IPO with a projected valuation of $1.1 billion. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Someone clapped before the crowd was even supposed to, but no one cared. Emily stood firm. She walked them through the growth, the architecture, the ethical oversight embedded into the AI itself. She highlighted the security protocols, the testing procedures, the independently verified results from the past fiscal year. She did not mention Vanessa. She did not mention Zach. She didn't have to. Nicholas's eyes welled up as he watched her. Not because of the number behind her, but because of the way she stood there, grounded, sure of herself. The world now saw what he'd always known. When the Q&A began, one reporter finally asked what the room had been dancing around. "You've remained silent on your family background. Can you speak to how it influenced your work?" Emily paused, then offered a small, polite smile. "Let's just say I learned early on not to wait for permission to build something worth protecting." A quiet murmur followed, half amusement, half respect. Nicholas's heart ached, but in the best way. She didn't need applause. But tonight, she earned it anyway. The reception following the IPO announcement was held on the rooftop of the building, the Austin skyline glowing behind glass rails, soft jazz humming in the background. Investors mingled. Cameras drifted. Champagne flowed. And then, like a shadow cutting through the light, they arrived. Vanessa. Daniel. Zach. Nicholas saw them before Emily did, Vanessa in an ivory blazer she wore like armor, Daniel stone-faced, trying too hard to look important, and Zach trailing behind them with that same overconfident smirk that had once fooled people into thinking he was going somewhere. They didn't belong here. They knew it. But they came anyway. The crowd parted subtly as they moved forward, recognition passing in low murmurs. And then, finally, they stood just feet from the stage where Emily was preparing to give her final remarks of the night. Nicholas stiffened, but Emily didn't flinch. She stepped back up to the mic, eyes flicking once to the front of the crowd, where Vanessa, Daniel, and Zach stood side by side, perfectly aligned like a display window of betrayal. She didn't acknowledge them directly. She didn't have to. This, Emily said, her voice crisp and cool, isn't just about valuation or market disruption. It's about identity. It's about building something from the ashes of silence. About never forgetting the weight of being dismissed. The audience quieted, leaning in. Emily's gaze swept the crowd, then landed directly on Vanessa, sharp and unwavering. This, she continued, is for everyone who said I was nothing. For the people who looked me in the eye and said I was just playing with computers. For those who traded loyalty for convenience. Who bet against me. She let the words hang in the air. Still no names. Just truth. Then she smiled. Just barely. And for the record. I don't play. There was a beat of silence. Then, from stage left, a man in a navy suit emerged. Discreet. Direct. He walked up to Zach, confirmed his identity, and handed him a sealed envelope. Zach blinked, stunned. What is this? The man nodded. You've been served. Whispers erupted. Vanessa turned sharply. Emily, what the hell is this? Emily didn't respond. She stepped back from the mic and simply stared, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She didn't yell. Didn't gloat. She had nothing to prove. The damage was already done. Zach ripped open the envelope and skimmed the papers, his face draining of color. This is insane, he muttered. You're suing me? Emily tilted her head. No. I'm holding you accountable. Vanessa started forward, face flushed. You think this is justice? No, Emily said, her voice cold as glass. This is the consequence of underestimating me. Then she turned away, graceful, composed, leaving them standing there, stunned and irrelevant. Nicholas met her at the edge of the stage, eyes wide, pride radiating from every pore. That was brutal, he whispered. Emily gave a half-smile. No, she said. That was restraint. And together, they walked back into the crowd, where she finally belonged, and where the past could no longer touch her. The headlines hit less than 48 hours later. Nicholas was sitting at the kitchen counter, sipping his morning coffee, when his phone buzzed with the first alert. Then a second. Then a flood. Breaking, Young Tech Mogul's IP breach leads to federal charges. Zachary Brooks accused of attempted IP theft from Sage Technologies. SEC opens formal investigation into Brooks and Holloway LLP. He didn't even need to finish reading. Emily had told him it was coming. Still, seeing it unfold in real time was something else. Down the hall, Emily emerged with her usual quiet calm, already dressed, hair pulled back. She slid her phone into her back pocket like she wasn't the reason an entire firm's reputation was going up in flames. They arrested him this morning, she said casually, pouring herself tea. 6:45 a.m. White-collar unit. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. And Gregory's firm? Being reviewed, she said. They'll claim they didn't know. But I've got internal emails Zach forwarded to Daniel, using the firm's servers. He used their letterhead to pitch my stolen model to a hedge fund in Chicago. It's textbook misrepresentation. Nicholas exhaled. You really kept receipts? I don't make accusations, Emily said. I file evidence. Later that day, a clip aired on national TV. Zach being let out of his condo in cuffs, his suit wrinkled, hair unkempt, shouting something about it being a misunderstanding. Behind him, Daniel was seen pushing through reporters, face red, barking at someone on the phone. Gregory was nowhere to be seen. Emily didn't react. Just sat on the couch beside her dad and finished reviewing a draft press statement from her legal team. "They'll drag this out," Nicholas said, watching the screen. "Try to bury you in countersuits." Emily shrugged. "They're fighting uphill. The code is mine. The servers are mine. The access logs are public record now." He looked at her, calm, poised, unbothered by the chaos she'd just unleashed. "You're 20 years old," he said softly, "and you just took down a law firm." She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just sipped her tea. And said, "Good." The fallout didn't stop with Zach. By the end of the week, headlines had shifted from financial scandal to full-blown reputational collapse. Gregory's firm, once seen as a stable, prestigious player in high-stakes corporate law, was bleeding clients. Hedge funds, tech companies, and real estate developers quietly pulled out, severing ties before the investigation reached deeper. Vanessa's name was mentioned more and more. At first, only in the context of Zach's family connection. But then came leaked emails. Phrases like structured redirection of funds and anticipated override of beneficiary consent painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. Nicholas sat at the apartment window one morning, watching the traffic hum beneath their building, when Emily stepped out of her room, holding her phone up like a trophy. "She called again," she said. Nicholas didn't need to ask who. Emily let the screen dim and placed the phone face down on the counter. "3 times this week. Same pattern. No apology. Just desperation." Nicholas sighed. "What's she saying?" Emily mimicked Vanessa's voice with chilling accuracy. "We should talk. This has gotten out of hand. We're still family." "She still doesn't get it," Nicholas said. "She never did." But that didn't stop Vanessa from trying. That Friday, she showed up in person. She wasn't wearing power heels or designer blouses this time. Just a beige coat, wrinkled at the sleeves. Her makeup was rushed. Her eyes bloodshot. Emily opened the door halfway and didn't invite her in. "I've lost everything," Vanessa said. "Daniel's clients are gone. My friends won't even speak to me. People think I'm a monster." Emily stared at her, unreadable. "You built that image yourself." "I was trying to do what was best for Zach," Vanessa pleaded. "For our future. You have everything now, why are you still punishing me?" Emily's voice came soft, but cutting. "I'm not punishing you. I just don't owe you anything." Vanessa's lip trembled. "You're my daughter." Emily's eyes didn't flicker. "And you treated me like a placeholder. Like I was in your way." Vanessa took a shaky breath. "So that's it? You're just going to erase me?" Emily tilted her head, her tone surgical. "You erased yourself the moment you gave away something that was never yours to give." Then she closed the door, calmly, quietly. Nicholas had been standing in the hallway the whole time. When she turned back toward him, there was no anger in her expression. No triumph. Just peace. "That chapter's done," she said. And she meant it. The apartment was unusually quiet that night. No calls. No screens flashing. No distant hum of market data or alerts chiming from Emily's command center. Just the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the steady hum of the city outside their window. Nicholas stood in the doorway of Emily's room, watching her as she adjusted her setup, organizing files, rerouting her second server, wiping old drives. She moved with focus, like someone always preparing for the next horizon. Always building. She didn't look up when she spoke. "You don't have to stand there like a museum visitor, you know." He chuckled and stepped inside, lowering himself into the old armchair in the corner, the one she never had the heart to get rid of, even after upgrading everything else. "I've been thinking," he said, rubbing his hands together slowly. "Back when you were little. I used to worry that you wouldn't find your way. Not because I didn't believe in you, but because the world, it didn't know how to hold someone like you. Emily finally turned toward him, curious but quiet. Nicholas took a breath, his voice steady. And now you've built something even I can't understand. I mean, what you've done, what you're doing, it's so far beyond me. The code, the finance, the strategy. But I understand this. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, looking her straight in the eye. I've never been more proud. Her face shifted, just slightly. Her eyes softened, her breath caught for a moment, and she looked away like the words hit harder than she expected. You always say that, she murmured. Because it's always more true. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Emily stood and crossed the room, sitting on the arm of the chair and resting her head lightly on his shoulder. You didn't build an algorithm, Nicholas said quietly, but you built something that matters. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to prove. Only something worth holding on to. By spring, the world had changed again, this time at Emily's pace. Nicholas would read about her in headlines before she even had time to mention what she was doing. One morning it was youngest woman to acquire multi-billion hedge fund portfolio. The next, it was Sage Technologies expands into Tokyo, Zurich, and London. Her name no longer appeared just in tech columns, it had started to show up on front pages, in keynote lineups, on finance panels usually reserved for CEOs twice her age. It wasn't overnight. It was never overnight. Emily built it brick by brick. Deal by deal. Move by move. While other founders flexed on social media and chased spotlights, she quietly absorbed old money institutions and turned them into sharp, adaptive arms of her growing machine. She opened her first international office in Zurich. Then London. Then Singapore. Each one sleek, lean, and built from the ground up with her own team, no corporate hand-me-downs. No bureaucracy. Just vision and execution. Nicholas watched it all happen from their apartment in Austin, though calling it their apartment had become a stretch. Emily was hardly ever home now. Between board meetings, site visits, and investor summits, she existed more in airports and across time zones than anywhere physical. But she never forgot where it started. She still texted him before every big move. Still sent late-night one-liners like buying a hedge fund tomorrow. Should I bring snacks? And every so often, she'd appear at the door unannounced, toss her keys on the counter, and collapse into their old couch like she hadn't missed a beat. And she didn't do it alone. Logan, her childhood friend, the lanky kid with the always falling glasses, was now officially Sage's chief operating officer. He handled day-to-day operations, employee scale-outs, and international hiring while Emily focused on R&D and future strategy. Together, they were a machine. Efficient. Loyal. Unshakable. He's the only one I trust to run the infrastructure, Emily had told Nicholas one evening. He knows where the pressure points are, and more importantly, he knows not to touch them without asking. It wasn't just about growth anymore. It was about foundation. And Emily was building one the world couldn't tear down. From the ashes of betrayal, she had created something no court or trust document could control, her own currency of influence. Unstoppable. Unapologetic. And this time, there was no one left to underestimate her. It was a quiet night again, just the two of them at the old kitchen table. The surface still had a faint ring from the time Emily had spilled ramen coating late into the night. Nicholas had never sanded it out. Felt like history. They sat across from each other now, eating Chinese takeout straight from the cartons. No cameras. No phones. Just chopsticks clinking softly and the hum of the city outside their window. Emily slouched slightly, her hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands despite the spring heat. She looked like a college kid home for break, except she'd just closed a $70 million acquisition in Europe 2 days ago. You ever think about it? Nicholas asked between bites. What it could have been like, if things had gone differently. If Vanessa had actually supported you? Emily paused, a piece of sesame chicken halfway to her mouth. She set her chopsticks down slowly, then looked up. They never believed in me, she said. Not once. Not when I was 10, building web scrapers. Not when I was 15 writing trade simulators. Not when I was just trying to be heard. She didn't say their names. She didn't have to. Her eyes softened. But you did, she said. You believed in me when I didn't even know what I was building yet. Nicholas swallowed hard. Something caught in his throat, not food. Memory. Emily picked up her carton again, but her voice stayed quiet. That's why I won. There was no bitterness in her words. Only truth. And gratitude. Nicholas watched her for a long moment, the soft glow from the kitchen light catching the edge of her jaw, the tired curve of her smile. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like his kid. And in that moment, it hit him all at once, not the money, not the revenge, not the empire she'd built from behind a screen. But the fact that she'd done it all with clarity. With purpose. With a fire she refused to let die, no matter who tried to smother it. She hadn't just survived betrayal. She'd built a legacy from it. A legacy stitched together with code, integrity, and pure, stubborn grit. As Emily stood to toss her carton in the trash, Nicholas leaned back in his chair, watching her move like she'd already outlived the people who once tried to define her. And maybe she had. She didn't need the past anymore. She'd rewritten the ending. And this time, she owned every word. If someone tried to take your child's future away, would you fight back? Or would you teach them to build something no one could ever take from them? Nicholas didn't fight with fists or lawyers. He didn't storm courtrooms or scream for justice. Instead, he stood quietly beside his daughter while the world underestimated her. And Emily? She didn't just reclaim what was hers, she rewrote the rules entirely. Some people take shortcuts. They manipulate. They scheme. They cut others out just to climb a little faster. But others, they take the long road. They lose first. They suffer quietly. They get pushed aside, told they're wasting time, told they'll never make it. And then, when the world isn't watching, they build. Brick by brick. Line by line. Until one day, the people who tried to break them realize. They don't just own the finish line. They own the whole map. So let me ask you, if this were your daughter, or your story, would you take revenge? Or would you let success answer for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated, and did you prove them wrong? Let's talk. Because stories like this, they're just getting started.